My name is David, and in January 2023, I decided to take a bus back home after visiting a friend in another city. The weather was dreadful, with a heavy snowstorm falling in Monroe, Michigan. I knew the bus ride would be challenging, but I had no idea what I was about to face. As I boarded the bus, the driver warned us about the bad weather and that the trip would take longer than usual. Inside the bus, the heating barely worked and the passengers were restless, but the howling winds outside made everyone prefer to stay together. The snowstorm intensified, and soon visibility through the window became nearly zero. After a few stops, our cell signals were cut off and the tension began to rise. The driver tried to reassure us, but conversations turned to nervous whispers. As the road narrowed, the bus took a sharp turn and suddenly skidded to a stop. It felt like there was no end to the storm. The driver stepped out to assess the situation while we waited anxiously. That was when, amid the sound of the storm, we started to hear whispers outside, like a distant choir. The voices seemed like calls, and the snow appeared to dance around us. As the driver tried to locate our way back, we realized the bus was stuck and panic began to set in. The voices grew louder and, like a scene from a movie, began to provoke a primal instinct within us. Some passengers wanted to open the door. Others insisted it should remain locked. The atmosphere inside the bus became tense and filled with debates, but all I wanted was to escape that place. With the snow piling up and the howling winds drowning out the driver's attempts to assess our situation, the sense of isolation deepened. I could feel the weight of the storm pressing against the bus, creating an almost suffocating environment. The whispers outside morphed into a cacophony, intertwining with our fears and uncertainties. Unable to sit still, I turned to a fellow passenger seated next to me, a weary-looking woman with a worried expression. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to gauge if she felt the same unsettling presence I did. She nodded slowly, her eyes wide with fear. "It's like they want us to join them," she whispered back, her voice barely audible over the din of the storm. As the minutes dragged on, I started to feel claustrophobic. The flickering lights inside the bus seemed to reflect the panic building within me. I glanced around. Everyone else was just as anxious, shifting in their seats and murmuring amongst themselves. My heart raced, and I could feel the urge to flee gnawing at me. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back of the bus, breaking the uneasy silence. Everyone jumped, a collective gasp filling the air. The driver rushed back inside, his face pale. "We need to stay calm," he urged. "Help is on the way." But deep down, I could see fear in his eyes, and I wondered if he believed his own words. As the storm continued to rage outside, the whispers became clearer, now sounding more like beckoning calls. I glanced out the window again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw shadowy figures moving in the swirling snow. Were they real, or just a trick of the light? The line between reality and imagination started to blur, feeding into our collective anxiety. In that moment, I knew we had to make a choice: remain captive in our bus, paralyzed by fear, or take a leap of faith and confront whatever lay outside. The whispers grew louder, urging us to embrace the unknown, to break free from our frigid prison. My heart raced as I turned to the others, ready to suggest we open the door and face the storm together. It was time to choose between fear and courage. And then, amidst all that, the bus door swung open. A gust of icy wind swept in, and a figure appeared in the snow. It was a pale man, inadequately dressed for the cold, as if he were lost. He looked at us, and with a desperate expression, yelled, "Help me!" But just as we approached him, he vanished. The bus was finally freed, and we continued our journey, but the presence of that man never left us. The feeling that something was amiss crept into our minds, like a stubborn shadow that refused to dissipate. The uneasy glances exchanged between passengers revealed a silent understanding that we were not merely contending with an unyielding snowstorm, but something far more sinister. The uncertainty hung in the air like a portent that this snowy journey would transform into a nightmare we would never forget. As the bus slowly navigated the snow-covered road, the tension escalated with each creak of the metal around us. The whispers we had heard earlier began to resonate again, but now they were more distinct and seemed to emerge from within our own memories. It felt as if the bus was connecting us to a presence that watched us from the snowflakes swirling around. With every turn the bus made, the sensation of being followed intensified. The snow no longer fell gently. Instead, an invisible pressure began to dominate the atmosphere. The driver seemed oblivious, but the nervous chatter amongst the passengers morphed into murmurs of worry. Overwhelmed by panic, we exchanged glances that reflected the same question. Who was the man in the snow? What did he want from us? When we finally reached a stop, the driver informed us that we needed to wait a moment. What should have been a relief turned into more anxiety. He stepped off the bus, leaving us alone in a shelter that now felt more like a prison amid the storm. The howling wind and the rising whispers surrounded us, transforming the cramped space into a minefield of emotions. As we sat there, fear and uncertainty coursing through our veins, it became clear the presence we felt was not just a figment of our imaginations, but an entity woven into the very fabric of the storm itself. We were caught in a delicate balance between reality and something far more insidious. Each shuddering breath we took mixed with the howling wind, reinforcing the bond we shared in that harrowing moment. We were not just passengers on a bus. We had crossed over into a realm where shadows lingered and the whispers of the unknown beckoned us forward. It was then that a woman, in an act of courage, decided to open the door to see what was happening. The cold expelled an involuntary scream from several passengers, and the rest of us tensed, uneasy about what we might find. As the door swung open, the force of the wind rushed in, and the weak light of the moon poured through, revealing a stormy landscape. The figure of the pale man was back, standing at the edge between the fog and the light. He seemed closer, yet still distant, looking straight at us with a desperate expression. He shouted again, "Help me!" and this time it sounded more intense. The desperation in his voice echoed, but before we could react, a gust of wind slammed the door shut with a bang, and the figure disappeared into the snowstorm once more. The tension was almost unbearable, and panic seized the bus again. The driver was still away, and fear rapidly spread among us. Some passengers started to argue about what to do, while others tried to ignore the voices that insisted on haunting us. Then, as if a signal had been given, everyone fell silent for a moment. The stillness hung in the air, except for the sound of the storm around us. When the driver finally returned, he looked pale, and there was a look of confusion on his face. "We need to keep moving. It's better not to stay here any longer," he said, sounding nervous. To our surprise, no one questioned his decision. Everyone wanted to leave that terrifying place. As the bus moved through the snow again, the voices that had once been whispers now seemed to scream. With each passing mile, an emptiness began to form in my chest. The presence of the man and the feeling that he was connected to the storm became increasingly real. My hands trembled on my lap as I tried to control the growing anxiety. If he was trying to warn us about something, we might be heading toward our own downfall. When we finally arrived in a town, the sense of relief was quickly replaced by the awareness that a shadow still loomed over us. What had truly happened that night would never be fully understood. Now, the journey home was fraught with tension, and the question echoing in my mind was, what had we really left behind that night? And would the guardian who sought our attention ever stop following us? There was a mark that this journey would leave on our hearts. As we drove down the new road, the feeling that certain experiences never fully fade solidified in my mind. The memory of the voices and the shadowy figure was not something I wanted to forget, but something that should accompany me as a constant reminder. Throughout the entire trip home, the focus was on reliving each event so that we wouldn't let fear dominate us. As soon as we arrived home, a wave of relief washed over me, but the discomfort lingered. The cabin and the forest felt like more than mere memories. They were part of something larger that many could not comprehend. Over time, The need to share and understand what we had experienced became a growing impulse. Together with Jason and the other bus passengers, we decided to write about our experience and seek answers. We created an online group where everyone could share their stories and build a community united by experiences that seemed to be woven into our destinies. The days spent waiting for answers transformed into a new purpose. I found support in the collective journey, and together we examined other accounts of strange and inexplicable encounters that arose in the forests of the United States. Each new story intertwined with ours, and gradually, a much stronger connection formed. In the months that followed, the desire to understand what happened in Monroe never left me. I compiled the reports I found about missing passengers in similar environments. There was a pattern of events that could not simply be coincidences. Each story tore through the veils of normalcy, revealing uncomfortable truths about what travelers might encounter in the woods. This convinced me that the figure we heard and the Guardian were parts of a universe we inhabit, where certain dimensions can intersect in moments of despair. In an act of courage, I decided it was time to return to Monroe, not just to revisit what had happened, but to bring closure to the experience and finally understand what lay behind the enigma. I invited Jason and some other friends from the group, determined to confront what had terrified us and seek hope amid the unknown. As we drove back to Monroe, the anticipation was palpable. We took the road under a cloudy sky, and soon the feeling that the shadows of the forest were watching us began to seep into our minds. A chilling cold filled the air, as if nature was aware of our mission and determined to test us. When we arrived at the cabin, the familiar sight evoked memories I couldn't ignore. The sensation of being watched returned with full force. This time, upon entering, there was no air of fear. Understanding and courage had become our pillars. With lanterns in hand, we decided to explore the forest that had once challenged us. The path seemed clearer, the shadows less oppressive as we walked. What once frightened us was now something we were willing to confront. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The sounds of the forest surrounded us, each rustle and whisper no longer an omen of dread, but an intrinsic part of the landscape we were now part of. Together, we shared stories, both old and new, creating a tapestry of resilience and camaraderie that pushed us forward. With every step, I felt a growing sense of purpose. The lingering presence of the pale man loomed in my mind, but it transformed into a question of understanding rather than fear. What message did he carry? What truths did the forest hold for us? And would we finally discover the answers we sought in the shadows that had once seemed insurmountable? As we navigated through the trees and embraced the challenges ahead, we knew that whatever we faced in the depths of the forest, we would do so side by side, united by our resolve and a shared desire to uncover the mysteries that had haunted us. Together, we were ready to face whatever awaited us, not as victims, but as seekers of truth and explorers of the unknown. As we moved away from the cabin, we heard the whispers again. They were closer now, but there was no sense of violation. It was almost as if they were waiting for us, as if the forest was opening up to reveal its secrets. Upon reaching a clearing that had once felt hostile, the idea that a presence was watching us became a memory rather than an oppressive reality. Recalling the diary and its warnings, we began to form a circle, each of us placing a symbolic object, an embodiment of our fears and the journey we were willing to undertake. As we shared our missions and hopes, something shifted. The breeze that blew became gentler, and the echoes of the forest seemed to wrap us in a warm embrace. At the end of our improvised ceremony, we united as a group and made our way back to the cabin. When we arrived, it was with the certainty that even if the Guardian was still present, we were no longer victims of fear. The love and unity among us strengthened our resolve, and the shadows that had once frightened us began to dissipate under the light of the courage we had found. We left Monroe with a new understanding. What happened that night was not merely a memory of terror, but a lesson about the strength we find in togetherness. The forests hold much more than secrets. They offer glimpses of our own truths and fears, and it is through experience that we find strength and understanding. As a group, we were determined to continue our adventures, now more aware of the potential for something unknown hidden in nature. The experience in Monroe would not linger as just an echo of fear, but as a milestone in our journey of growth and resilience. In the months that followed, we continued exploring new areas and building new memories. The forest became a space for learning, where every tree and whisper was seen as an ally rather than an enemy. The connection we formed solidified, and whenever we set out on a new adventure, we carried with us the lessons we learned during our visit to Monroe. Over time, we became advocates not just for our own experiences, but for those who had yet to find their space to share their stories. We organized monthly gatherings where we recounted our outdoor experiences, encouraging others to join in and share as well. With each meeting, tales of courage and triumph interwove, forming a rich tapestry of experiences that celebrated both the struggle and the joy of the journey. In this way, we transformed our fear into a powerful force for connection and understanding, ensuring that no one felt alone in their encounters with the unknown. Thus, the legacy of that snowy night in Monroe became a beacon of hope and a reminder that we are stronger together, no matter what challenges we face in the shadows or the light. There came a moment when we decided it was time to return to Monroe, not just to revisit that place, but to rewrite our story and confront what had once terrified us. With light hearts and open minds, we made our way to the forest, prepared to understand and process everything that had happened. There was a new sense of empowerment within our group, an awareness that we were now more attuned to the mysteries that nature held. When we arrived at the cabin, every detail felt familiar, although there was still a strange sensation in the air. This time, we brought protective items, stones, roots, and talismans, ready to honor the place and respect the energy that resided there. It was our commitment to nature and to our own stories that united and strengthened us on our journey to this point. As night fell, we decided to light a campfire in the area around the cabin, a space that was now our base. The flames crackled and danced, each pop and sigh of the wood reminding us that we were alive and safe together. We shared stories, but instead of merely recalling the past, we transformed the narratives into celebrations of courage and understandings about the strength of the connection that had formed among us. As I looked at the faces of my friends illuminated by the firelight, I realized that what had transpired was not a curse, but an invitation to grow. We discussed the presence of the guardian that we had once associated with fear and what it meant to confront that being. Now, we understood that, in truth, it could symbolize the truths the forest was teaching us and the importance of respecting and acknowledging the unknown. That night was one of acclaim. Feeling the energy around us, we decided, much like with other experiences, to create a ritual of gratitude, celebrating not only our journey, but everything nature had to offer us. As the firelight began to wane and shadows danced around us, we knew that the forest was not an enemy. It was a guardian and a teacher. With dawn approaching, we felt a profound respect for everything we had lived through. The snowstorm had dissipated, but the presence of that shadow would remain as a reminder that nature and its twists always protect their stories. As we left Monroe, the feeling that we were stronger and more united hung in the air, and what had once been merely an echo of fear was now transforming into a celebration of overcoming. Thus, we left the forest with a new understanding, that what happens between us and nature is deeper than we can understand at first glance. The guardian and the voices became parts of our stories, not as burdens, but as opportunities for growth and evolution. Life outdoors united us and allowed us to see that each shadow and every echo in the forest has its place, even if we do not fully comprehend everything about it. The experience in Monroe was not an ending, but a rebirth. And as we drove through the roads and mountains, we knew there would always be more to explore and more truths to discover on the road ahead. My name is Chris, and in February 2022, I accepted a friend's offer to spend a weekend in a cabin in the woods of Winter Haven, Florida. The weather was sweltering, the temperature was soaring, and a light rain was falling. The idea of spending some time isolated in nature felt rejuvenating, until reality took a darker turn. Upon arriving, I noticed that the cabin was old, surrounded by tall trees, and had an air of abandonment. There was something peculiar about it. The first night began with fun conversations and laughter, but as time went on, the rain began to intensify. The story of the cabin being haunted emerged during dinner, and soon the whispers that we might not be alone began to fill the room. Shortly after, while opening one of the windows to hear the rain better, I noticed something lurking amidst the trees, a shadow that seemed to be moving toward us. I tried to get my friend's attention, but they laughed, thinking it was just my imagination. I went back inside, but the growing unease began to consume me. That night, the storm reached its peak. The wind was howling fiercely, and the wood of the cabin creaked. I was awakened by a loud sound, as if something was banging on the door. My friends were confused, but the sound intensified again. I got up and looked out the window, but all I could see were shapes and shadows. When I decided to go downstairs to check it out, I found a door ajar. Rain was coming in, pooling on the wooden floor of the cabin, and fear illuminated my mind. Quickly closing the door, I returned to the group, trying to hide my panic. We needed to stay calm, but the atmosphere was changing. The discussions about ghosts and horror stories that had once been amusing were now turning into nervousness. No one seemed to be truly relaxed. A shadow outside appeared to shift among the trees, but it vanished whenever we tried to look directly at it. We continued to hear noises coming from outside, yet we couldn't see what was truly out there. Finally, someone suggested we play a card game to ease the tension, but nature was becoming far more engaging than any game we could play. Time and again, the idea of leaving began to infiltrate our conversations, but the rain made it seem impossible. As the night wore on and the storm raged, I could feel the collective anxiety rising. The shadows outside felt like they were closing in, and every creak of the cabin seemed to echo with the weight of our fears. The atmosphere thickened, and the laughter we once shared turned into strained smiles as we cautiously glanced at each other, grappling with the unshakable feeling that we weren't alone. Then, amid the chorus of rain and wind, we heard a distinct voice calling out from the darkness outside. It was faint, just a whisper lost in the storm, but it sent shivers down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The others nodded, expressions shifting from skepticism to unease. At that moment, we knew we had crossed a line. What was supposed to be a fun getaway had morphed into something far more sinister. The cabin, once a place of refuge, now felt like a trap, and the shadows outside no longer seemed harmless. We huddled closer together, drawn into the flickering light of the candles, and the reality of our situation began to sink in. Whatever had stirred in the night was no longer just a frightful tale. It was a growing sense of dread that surrounded us. When I glanced out the window again, I saw a fleeting figure silhouetted by the flickering light of the storm. The fear lodged in my throat as I realized we had to confront what lay beyond. The whispers and shadows were no longer just figments of our imagination. They were warnings of a reality we were not prepared to face. It was time to decide whether we would stay and confront the unknown or try to escape the darkness that was closing in around us. The night was far from over, and as the wind howled, a sense of determination sparked within me. We would face whatever was out there together, or we would not leave that cabin at all. Then, as the storm reached its peak, the sound became deafening. A thunderclap shook the cabin, and we all fell into silence. For a moment, I could have sworn I heard voices outside, indistinguishable calls echoing through the tempest. "What's happening?" one of my friends whispered. Deciding it was time to venture out, we grabbed our flashlights and made our way outside. When we stepped out, the rain hit us hard, and we began to follow the voices. Each step in the mud felt heavier, the shadows among the trees thicker. We moved away from the cabin, and the sound of the voices seemed to vibrate around us. Then, with a snap, everything fell silent once more. We stood still in a clearing, the flashlight beams flickering among the trees surrounding us. What had initially been pure fear and the madness of our minds had now become reality. A figure stood there, its face hidden beneath a hood, and as it slowly turned, I realized something was horribly wrong. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. In that moment, the figure lifted its hand and pointed at me, and the voices surged again, a chorus of whispers mingling with the rain. One by one, my friends began to sprint back toward the cabin, and chaos erupted. When we finally burst inside and locked the door, what we had been facing collapsed into the reality of the rain, but it would never escape our memories. The horror of the night seemed to stretch beyond the storm, and the presence of that figure was etched into our minds. Panic surged through us as we huddled together in the dim light of the cabin. The shadows danced ominously, and the atmosphere was thick with dread. We shared wide-eyed glances, each of us grappling with our own fear and confusion. Was it merely a trick of the storm, or had we truly encountered something beyond our understanding? As the rain continued to batter the cabin and the wind howled outside, we tried to rationalize what had happened. But deep down, we knew there were mysteries in the woods that we couldn't explain. The figure, with its outstretched hand, was a symbol of the unknown pleading for our attention, reminding us that nature held secrets that could be both enchanting and terrifying. We made a pact then, not to let fear dictate our experiences, but to respect the wildness surrounding us. No matter what we faced, we would confront it together as a united front. The voices we heard would serve as a reminder that we were not alone, and we would carry this experience with us, not as a burden, but as part of our journey through the unsettling beauty of the world. With that resolve, we sat in silence, awaiting the storm's end, knowing that we were stronger for having faced the darkness together. Whatever lay ahead, we were prepared to meet it, fear and all. That cabin in Winter Haven would never be just a refuge. It was an experience that would leave us fearing the shadows forever. As we locked ourselves inside, a momentary sense of safety enveloped us, but the truth was that panic still pulsed through our veins. The echo of what we had experienced became more evident, and the deafening silence that settled in now felt like an omen, preparing us for what was yet to come. The sound of rain and the howling wind turned into a symphony of terror that kept us awake. I looked at the faces of my friends. They were all frozen in place, expressions of fear mirroring the same uncertainty we felt. Whatever was outside now seemed to be in control, as if it were simply waiting for our defenses to lower. The situation grew increasingly oppressive, and with every creak of the cabin's wood, our anxiety levels soared. I decided we needed to do something to stave off the fear that was consuming us. Let's talk about what we saw. We need to get this out, I suggested. Hesitantly, everyone agreed, and we began sharing what each of us had felt. As we spoke, the voices outside seemed to intensify, a chorus of words melding with the sound of the rain, making the presence of the figure feel even closer and more terrifying. Jake, in a moment of bravery, suggested we step outside and confront the figure we had seen. Though the idea was scary, there was also a growing impulse to face what we didn't understand. The shadows we had witnessed could very well be a product of our imagination, but the certainty remained present in our hearts. So, we decided that if we were to fear the darkness, we would do so together. Armed with flashlights and the remaining fragments of courage, we all stepped out of the cabin once again into the storm that raged on. The feeling of being watched heightened, but with each step in the muddy snow, we united in mutual support. As we approached the clearing where the figure had stood, the enveloping cold seemed to intensify, and a shiver ran down my spine as the voices began to meld into our thoughts. In that clearing, surrounded by towering trees swaying in the wind, we hastily formed a circle. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows loomed larger under the dim light of our lanterns. If there's something out here, we face it together, I said, trying to instill confidence in the group. We nodded in agreement, locking eyes with one another, searching for strength in our solidarity. The moment felt surreal as we called out to the figure we had seen earlier, our voices trembling amid the storm. "We're not afraid of you," Jake shouted, his tone wavering but defiant. The wind howled in response, almost mocking our bravery. Just then, as if acknowledging our call, the figure appeared again, this time more defined amidst the swirling snow. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its features obscured by the hood it wore, but the sensation of desperation emanating from it was palpable. "Help me," it seemed to whisper, though the wind carried the sound away almost immediately. A shiver ran through us, and despite our resolve to confront it, fear threatened to overtake our courage. Was it really asking for help, or was this some kind of trick? The questions blurred the line between reality and nightmare. We stood there, straining to make sense of the moment, the storm bearing down upon us, the figure waiting quietly. The choice lay before us, to turn back to the safety of the cabin or to step forward and understand what lay in the shadows. With unity strengthened by courage, we gathered our resolve and stepped closer, prepared to confront whatever truth awaited us, knowing that together we had the power to face whatever the night held. As we stood at the edge of the clearing, our lantern lights flickered and the atmosphere weighed heavily on our chests. Looking around, the figure from the previous night was there once again, but now it appeared different. The hood still concealed its face, but something about its posture seemed more threatening. Fear paralyzed us. The whispers that once were mere shadows in our minds now filled the space, echoing our insecurities. "Who are you?" Kyle shouted, his voice echoing into the restless night. But in response, the figure remained silent. It simply raised its hand, and in a heartbeat, the sound of the rain and wind calmed. The silence was deafening, and a strange sensation began to form among us, as if we were being tested in some way. Finally, a voice emerged from the shadows, woven into the mist of the night. "You shouldn't be here." The tone conveyed a mixture of control and desperation, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Before we could respond, the figure vanished into the deeper shadows of the forest, like a mirage evaporating with a slight change of light. Panic surged again, and a singular thought grasped all of us: return to the safety of the cabin. We ran together, adrenaline coursing through us as we dashed across the clearing, the sharp, heavy air filled with our screams of terror. When we finally reached the cabin and locked the door, oppressive silence enveloped us once more, the echo of the storm and the whispered voices fading, but only temporarily. In the ensuing moments, we tried to process what we had just experienced. What did it all mean? Had we entered into a game with something we didn't even understand? A being or a presence that seemed to be testing us? As the storm continued to rage outside, one thought began to take shape. What was the figure trying to tell us? What did it all signify? Despair and confusion gripped us, and we knew we couldn't simply ignore the situation. The presence of that guardian, terrifying as it was, beckoned us to understand and confront what lay hidden. "We need to discover what this figure means," I said, trying to break the heavy silence that hung between us. The idea of ignoring it or retreating felt increasingly unbearable, and the desire for an answer became imperative. We exchanged glances, sensing the tension, but it seemed we were driven by something beyond our will, a force guiding us. Gathering our courage, we began to discuss what steps we should take next. "We have to go back out there," Jake suggested, his voice steady despite the fear etched on his face. "We can't let this consume us. We have to face it." His words resonated with many of us, igniting a flicker of determination. With lanterns in hand and our resolve fortified, we prepared once more to step outside. The world beyond the doors felt distant, yet familiar. We realized it was a part of us now, intertwined with our experience. Together, we opened the door, stepping out into the swirling storm, ready to confront whatever truth awaited us in the shadows. This time, we would face the unknown united, empowered by the understanding that our fears are often the keys to unlocking deeper truths. With lanterns in hand, we resolved to return to the forest, The whisper of the wind and the gentle sound of the rain were now our companions, and the palpable darkness seemed to embrace us and steer us off our path. Each of us hesitated, but the determination and desire to understand pushed us onward. The forest was full of secrets, and somehow we knew we were part of it. When we arrived at the clearing again, tension and fear were palpable, but this time the energy felt different. What had once been terrifying now seemed more like a series of challenges we needed to overcome. The echoes of the voices that had scared us now seemed to beckon us, as if nature itself was encouraging us to seek understanding. "I'm here," I shouted, calling out to the figure from before. "We are ready to listen." The bravery that had once felt distant now united us, and at the back of the clearing, something moved in the shadows. The sound of the wind mingled with the murmuring rain, but in a moment of tranquility, we realized the figure was back, more visible and frequently recognized among the trees. This time, the shadow did not withdraw. Instead, it stepped forward, and the clearing seemed to light up with the presence of that figure. I could swear something in its demeanor was different. Instead of fear, a feeling of curiosity blossomed among us. The shadow paused, and although we still couldn't see its face, the aura it exuded was almost comforting. "Are you ready to accept the truth?" The question echoed across the clearing, and our hearts raced. We couldn't discern the source of the voice, but it was clear as crystal. The call made us hesitate. What did it mean to accept the truth? We were about to cross a line that could change everything. Hearing the answer within me, I realized it wasn't just about confronting a specter or a presence. It was about facing our own fears and uncertainties. "We're ready," I yelled back, my voice steady. The figure took a step forward, and instead of attacking, it cast a soft light that circled around us, as if enveloping us in a deeper connection. Suddenly, everything became clear again. The shadows that had once terrified us were now witnesses to our courage. The whispers of the trees and the nearby voices were not omens of our doom, but reminders that by confronting fear, we could uncover truths that resided within ourselves. In that moment, we stood together, united not only in our bravery, but in the understanding that the journey we had embarked upon was about growth and enlightenment. The forest no longer felt like a foreboding place, but a haven of wisdom waiting to be discovered. As we shared that illuminating experience, we felt the weight of our previous encounters lift, replaced by a sense of liberation. We understood that we were not just facing external fears, but embracing the profound journey of self-discovery. Together, we took a collective breath, ready to step into the light of truth and understanding, knowing that the shadows had transformed, serving as guides rather than threats. In that moment, we became more than just a group of friends. We became explorers of the depths of nature and ourselves, committed to uncovering all that lay hidden in the dark. Feeling the liberation from that experience, a murmur of relief swept through the group. The presence of the figure was no longer something to fear, but a guide inviting us to venture deeper into the unknown. With a new understanding of what truly mattered, we followed the footprints leading in the opposite direction, not to escape, but to embrace what the forest had to offer. And so, as we walked together, we descended into the depths of the woods, knowing we were ready to unravel the mysteries surrounding us, and that, in some way, the shadow had become a part of our personal growth. As we left that clearing behind, it left a lasting impression on our hearts, with the renewed courage to understand that as long as there were stories to be told, we would always have the strength to face them. Embracing the sounds of the forest, we absorbed the sights around us. The towering trees, the rustling leaves, and the soft calls of wildlife felt like allies guiding us forward. There was a sense of connection to everything around us, as if we were not intruders, but rather welcomed participants in the life of the forest. We stumbled upon a small stream, the water glistening under the filtered sunlight that broke through the canopy. Sitting by its edge, we shared our thoughts, reflecting on how far we had come, from fear and confusion to understanding and courage. The water flowed steadily, much like the journey we were undertaking, reminding us that each step, no matter how uncertain, was part of a greater flow of life. As we resumed our walk, the air felt charged with a sense of purpose. The forest seemed to come alive around us, no longer a source of terror, but a vibrant tableau filled with potential. The deeper we ventured, the more we realized that the unknown didn't have to be something to dread. It could be full of beauty, learning, and discovery. With each passing moment, we also felt the weight of our individual fears lighten. The shadow that had once loomed over us transformed into a whisper of encouragement, urging us to explore not only the forest, but also the depths of our own beings. We began to share our aspirations and dreams, knowing that the connection we forged would help us navigate whatever lay ahead. Finally, after wandering for what felt like hours, we found a clearing illuminated by the setting sun. It was breathtaking, a serene oasis that seemed to beckon us to pause and reflect. Here, in this enchanting space, we understood that the true gift of our journey was not merely the destination, but the transformation we had undergone together. In that moment of stillness, we vowed to embrace the unknown in all its forms, to honor our fears while also cherishing the strength they had uncovered within us. We were no longer just friends. We were a family bound by shared experiences and a commitment to explore life with open hearts and minds. As we lingered in that magical clearing, we realized that every story, every shadow, and every whisper held the potential for growth, connection, and wisdom in the journey that lay ahead. My name is Lucas, and in January 2022, I decided to spend a weekend in a cabin by Lake Tahoe, California, with my girlfriend Jenna. The forecast predicted a storm, but we were excited to embrace the cozy atmosphere and the beauty of the lake. Upon our arrival, the rain began to fall, and the sky quickly darkened. After settling in and lighting the fireplace, the mood seemed perfect. But as the storm rolled in, the sounds from outside began to grow unsettling. It felt as if nature was stirring, and the ambience inside the cabin was anything but calm. Soon, we started to hear whispers, first soft, then more insistent. They seemed to levitate among the rain, indistinct, but clearly present. I tried to convince Jenna that it was just the wind and the storm, but she was as agitated as I was, the tension palpable between us. After a while, Jenna decided she needed some fresh air. I hesitated, but seeing her determination, I followed her outside. As soon as we stepped onto the porch, a wave of cold hit us. The rain was pouring heavily, and although we were only stepping out for a moment, the feeling that something was watching us intensified with every passing second. As we talked, the whispers grew clearer, and I realized they were not just echoes of the storm. The voices seemed to be calling our names. Lucas, Jenna. It was almost like a summons, and the chilling sensation running down my spine made me feel that something was amiss. My instincts screamed that we shouldn't be there. It's like someone is calling us, I whispered to Jenna, but she shook her head, looking anxiously into the woods. It must be the wind. Let's go back inside, she suggested, but just the words were enough to heighten the tension in the air. As we started to return to the cabin, the voices became more insistent, almost as if they were following us back. The porch door creaked shut behind us, and the sound of the wind intensified even further. Back inside the safety of the cabin, the atmosphere shifted rapidly. The cold from outside seemed to follow us in, and a sense of unease settled over us. We lit some candles and tried to distract ourselves with music, but still the restlessness lingered. The whispers seemed to echo off the walls, and the tension between us grew. When the power finally flickered and went out, the darkness became oppressive. The sound of the storm was no longer just the rhythmic patter of raindrops. It was heavy thumps, scratches, and amid those sounds, every now and then, we heard whispers in the darkness. Come back to us. This can't be happening, Jenna said, her voice trembling. The weight of what we had thought was merely an uncomfortable moment was now shifting into pure paralysis. We decided to lock ourselves in the bedroom. but the feeling of being observed prevented us from relaxing. In a surge of determination, I picked up the flashlight. We needed to know what was happening outside. When I opened the bedroom door, there was no sound at all. The silence was deafening. I walked into the living room, and that's when I saw the silhouette of a hooded figure in the corner of the room, only partially illuminated by the flashlight's beam. My eyes widened at the sight of the figure, which seemed so real, but as I moved closer, it vanished. Panic washed over me, and I stepped back instinctively. "Did you see that?" I whispered, turning back to Jenna, but she was already staring wide-eyed at the space where the figure had been. I don't know what's happening," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. As we stood there in the darkness, both of us shaken, the whispers returned, swirling around us, echoing through the cabin, and it became clear that nothing was as it seemed. In that moment, we knew we had to decide: surrender to the fear that gripped us or confront whatever lay in the shadows. Deep down, we felt we had to find out what the whispers wanted from us, what connection we shared with this presence that seemed to inhabit our surroundings. As fear tightened its grip on us, we took a deep breath, fueled by the determination to face the unknown together. With the flashlight in hand, we took our first steps towards uncovering the truth, ready to confront whatever awaited us in the dark. With my heart in my throat, I called for Jenna, but when she arrived, the figure was no longer there. The voices began again, now screaming, "Help us!" Before I could process it, I heard a loud crash coming from the door. The force of the wind made everything tremble. I pushed Jenna back and tried to brace the door, but the terror left me paralyzed. Finally, at dawn, the storm began to dissipate. Rays of sunlight poured through the window, but the voices and the figure remained. We resolved to leave the cabin immediately. We gathered our things, and as we stepped outside, I looked back to see that the figure was standing there, now more distinct in the light of day, yet with an expression of pain. It was as if it were trapped between two worlds, and a sense of eternal sorrow lingered around us. After that experience in Tahoe, I could never look at the forest the same way again. The memory of the whispers amidst the storm transformed into a perennial warning. Some experiences in isolated places carry much darker stories beyond our understanding. The feeling that the figure was caught between two realms and had somehow marked us became a constant part of my thoughts. As we drove away from the cabin, the silence in the car was uncomfortable. I glanced at Jenna and saw that her eyes were fixed on something outside the window, reflecting the shadows of the memory of our shared experience. It felt as if we were both trying to process what had happened, shaped by fears we could no longer ignore. That figure, and whatever had been calling out to us, left an indelible mark that we couldn't erase. The drive home was filled with unspoken words, each of us lost in our own thoughts, replaying the events in our minds. We were silent, but there was an understanding between us, an acknowledgement of what we had faced together. The world outside blurred as we moved further away from the cabin, but the impact of that experience remained vivid. Days turned into weeks, and the echoes of that night lingered in my subconscious. I began to notice the shadows and sounds of the woods in a different light. Each rustle and whisper held a weight that I was now acutely aware of. I found myself drawn to the stories of others who spoke of similar experiences, seeking solace in the shared recognition of the inexplicable. In time, Jenna and I began to talk more openly about that night. It became a ritual to share our thoughts and feelings, attempting to untangle the threads of fear and curiosity that still bound us. We realized that facing the unknown together had forged an unbreakable bond, one that transcended the shadows of our past experiences. With every conversation, we unearthed new layers of understanding about ourselves and the world around us. We began to see the forests not just as places of fear, but as realms of possibility, where the whispers could guide us toward deeper truths. And as we prepared for our next adventure into nature, we carried with us the lessons learned from that stormy night. The knowledge that sometimes the greatest depths of fear lead to the most profound journeys of discovery. In the weeks that followed, the image of the hooded figure continued to haunt me. I tried to return to my routine, But each noise at night drew me back to that cabin. The ominous sound of echoes and whispers became a presence, watching me from every corner. I sought distractions to alleviate the tension, but the restlessness remained. One day, we decided it was time to discuss the experience more deeply. I invited Jenna and a few friends over for a conversation where we could finally lay bare what we had lived through. As we gathered, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation and trepidation. Each of us began to share our memories, and the feeling of being together while recalling that night surprisingly united us. As we spoke about the whispers and the figure, I realized that everyone had been experiencing disturbing dreams since the trip. The reason we had undergone such intense moments gradually unfolded. As the words flowed, the connection between our fears and what we had encountered in the cabin became clearer. We were not just a group of friends. We were a collective that had faced something significant. During the conversation, one of our friends suggested that we should return to Tahoe together, not as an exploration of fear, but as a way to reclaim our experience, an act of courage. We exchanged encouraging glances, realizing that we could confront the shadows once more, but now with the strength of our friendship and determination. With a plan in mind, we organized the trip for the following month, resolved to face our past. As we arrived in Tahoe, an energy of anticipation enveloped us, and the thought of encountering the snowstorm again did not fill us with fear. We promised each other that supporting one another would be key to traversing the unknown. Approaching the cabin once more, there was none of the same fears and anxieties we had felt before. Instead, there was a sense of respect for the experience we had gone through and the acknowledgement that nature has its own laws and voices. We were ready to listen to what the forest had to teach us. The fear that had once trapped us in the cabin now dissipated under the light of understanding. Inside the cabin, everything felt familiar, but now we carried a new purpose. The journal and the markings on the walls reminded us that we were there to learn. As we began to explore the cabin, the memories, the voices, and the experiences, I looked at the faces of my friends and saw the determination reflected in their eyes. We were no longer prisoners of fear. We were explorers of the unknown. With each step we took within those walls, we could feel the weight of our previous anxieties slowly lifting. We shared our intentions with one another, expressing what we hoped to uncover during our time there. Jenna spoke of wanting to understand the figure's message, while another friend expressed curiosity about the stories the journal might hold. Determined, we gathered around the fireplace, relighting the flames, and settled into a circle. As the flames flickered and cast shadows on the walls, we began to recount our experiences from the last visit, each sharing the moments that had left the deepest impressions. Through our vulnerability, we found strength, realizing that our collective narrative had evolved beyond mere fear. We were not only here to confront the figure or the whispers, but to embrace whatever insights the forest had to offer about our own lives and fears. The cabin, which had once felt like a site of dread, now became a sanctuary for growth and healing. As the sun began to set outside, casting an orange glow through the trees, we felt a sense of tranquility wash over us. We knew that whatever we might face, we would confront it together. The whispers in the storm had transformed from an ominous sound into a call to understanding. We were ready to embrace the unknown and the lessons it would provide, united in our journey through both darkness and light. Throughout the night, we began to share our experiences once more, but this time with a tone of respect and gratitude. The snowstorm outside felt embracing, a reminder that life is composed of experiences, some joyful, some terrifying, but all unique. And as we finally settled around the fireplace, feeling the energy of the night vibrating around us, I realized that we were not just a horror story, but a celebration of life and the lessons we were ready to learn. With every shadow that flickered in the firelight, we understood that the experience in Tahoe, though terrifying, was a valuable opportunity for growth. The presence of the hooded figure had not died in our hearts. It had become part of our story and a reminder that often the greatest challenges bring the greatest rewards. As we wrapped up that night with a new understanding, we felt stronger and more connected than ever. It was as if the experience in Tahoe had served as a rite of passage, a journey of discovery that not only challenged our fears, but also united us in a web of courage and mutual support. The notion that the hooded figure was there merely to observe us transformed into a symbol of our own resilience. The next morning, we decided the best course of action was to reinforce our bond with nature, so we made plans for a hike. As the first light of day broke, the freshly fallen snow sparkled in the sunlight, and the forest unfolded before us in a spectacle of beauty and serenity. The shadows that once terrified us now felt like part of the landscape, a constant reminder of our journey. Walking along the trail, we exchanged stories about what it meant to face our fears. Each of us shared reflections on how past experiences had shaped who we were and how confronting the unknown had become a symbol of growth and learning. What had once felt like a burden transformed into a gift, the wisdom we could extract from pain and struggle. As we delved deeper into the woods, the voices that had once haunted us turned into a familiar murmur, as if welcoming us and acknowledging the courage we had shown. Fear was replaced by acceptance and respect. The connection to nature enveloped us, and with each step, we felt we were writing a new story of overcoming. At one point during our hike, we discovered a frozen lake reflecting the blue sky above us. The beauty of the place was breathtaking, and we decided to pause to contemplate the landscape. There, sitting by the edge of the lake, each of us made a silent vow, a commitment that we would never allow fear to keep us prisoners again. It was a reminder that we are stronger than the circumstances we encounter. As we absorbed the tranquil scene, the reflections in the icy surface mirrored our journey, clear and beautiful, yet shaped by the challenges we had faced. In that moment of quietude, we reaffirmed our commitment not only to each other, but to the lessons learned and the growth achieved. With our hearts and minds aligned in purpose, we rose to continue our adventure, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, empowered by the knowledge that we could confront the shadows together. After a period of reflection, my mind returned to the figure we had encountered in the forest. "Do you think we could find it again?" I asked, curious. My friends exchanged glances, but there was no fear in their eyes, only the thrill of possibility. "If it's really watching us, maybe it's something I should confront again," Jake said, and we all agreed that it would be important to offer the presence our insight. We decided that before leaving Tahoe, we needed to complete our journey. We headed back to the clearing where the figure had appeared. The sunlight was softly filtering through the trees, and as we approached, we discovered a space that seemed to hold an alerting energy. Softer voices and echoes grew more audible as we neared, as if the forest was guiding us. With courage coursing through our veins, we called out to the presence. We did not come to fight, but to understand. Our echoes danced among the trees. The connection we formed seemed to create a space of reverence, and just as quickly as the silence settled, a shadow crossed our vision. The anticipation returned, but now with a renewed purpose. The figure appeared again, not as a threatening being, but as a spirit of the forest, a reverberation of what had been there before. The presence moved closer, and in a moment of profound clarity, I could feel that instead of watching us, it was guiding us toward the truth. "You have listened. Now you must hear and respect what the forest has to teach." It resonated, once again in that familiar whispering tone. With new understanding, we closed our eyes and, together, made a silent connection with the forest and the figure, surrendering the memories, fears, and burdens we carried. We emerged from that experience more aware of what nature could offer and wiser than when we had entered. As we left the clearing, the shadows and voices transformed into echoes of stories that would continue to be told and respected in the woods for many years to come. Thus, my time in Tahoe became a journey that not only completed a cycle, but also initiated a new one. What we lived there reminded us that every hidden shadow can bring light to our own understanding, and the forest will always have something to teach and reveal to us if we are willing to listen and respect. As we departed Tahoe, a newfound sense of peace enveloped us. The inevitability of encountering the unknown was no longer a source of fear, but an open door to new adventures. With each step we took toward the new season, our group became stronger, more unified, and certain that our connection with nature had evolved into a profound relationship. As we drove back on the winding roads, conversations about what we had discovered mingled with laughter, now free from the nightmares that had once watched over us. The experience had transformed into a symbol of resilience that united us. Talking about the vigilance of the shadow and how we faced those moments made us realize we were more than just friends. We were like a family supporting each other through challenges. The journey through Tahoe hadn't been a burden, but rather a path that allowed us to understand the fragility of human experiences. As the mountains faded into the distance, giving way to the life we knew, the excitement of returning home was immense. There were stories trapped in every corner, but the connection we had forged finally brought relief. The echoes of the forest would remain behind, but I also knew that the secrets they held would stay alive in our memories and the stories we chose to tell. Time passed, yet the mark of the experience in Tahoe did not fade. With each new season, as I walked through nature, I felt the shadows of the past accompanying me. I decided it was my duty to share these stories with others, so that more people could understand that nature is not just a place of beauty, but a repository of experiences that can teach us about courage and vulnerability. The blog became a space where not just I, but many others were able to share their stories of encounters with the unknown. What could have been terror had now become part of our collective journey. With each new account I received, it became clear that there was a cycle of understanding and respect among those who shared their experiences. Therefore, I planned an event to share stories and build a community of people who had encountered mysteries in nature. During the event, participants brought their own narratives of incredibly strange and revealing experiences in isolated places. There was a special energy in the room. It felt as if we were all connected by an invisible thread of shared experiences. What had started as a simple gathering transformed into a space filled with power and release. Each story told was a step toward healing and understanding. Throughout the night, many felt inspired to share their fears and insecurities regarding nature and the presences they believed they had encountered. Together, we formed a circle of support, where fear transformed into empathy and vulnerability became strength. The shadows ceased to be symbols of terror and instead became symbols of transformation and learning. In that sacred space, the boundaries between us blurred, and the stories we shared created a tapestry of courage that resonated with everyone present. We honored our pasts while also embracing the present and future. By the end of the night, we all felt lighter, knowing that we had taken the first steps together in transforming our fears into stories of hope and connection. As we closed the event, I looked around the room, filled with the warmth of shared experiences and newfound friendships. I realized that it was only through facing our fears, not in isolation, but united as a community, that we could truly learn from the shadows and the light. And so, our journey continued, forever enriched by the lessons nature had to offer, our hearts open to both the mysteries and the wonders that lay ahead. As we concluded the night, we reflected on the importance of continuing to respect, honor, and learn from nature. Each of us had brought a new light to the understanding that the experiences we went through were not just our story, but a warning for those who dare to explore what life and solitude in nature can reveal. Leaving that event, I felt a renewal within myself. I knew that as a group, we were now more than just survivors. We were explorers, ready to dare and cast a new light on our experiences. I thought about the forests and the mysteries they held. They were not merely legends. They were inviting and protective of a wisdom we needed to respect and seek. Thus, as we set off on new adventures, I always carried in my heart the memory of the shadow at Lake Tahoe and how what seemed dark could actually be a light on our path. Our journey was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever life had to offer, with the echoes of the past guiding me ever onward into the unknown. Every step forward served as a reminder of the strength we found together, the connections forged through shared fears and triumphs. The shadows that once loomed overhead transformed into symbols of resilience and growth, empowering each of us to embrace the uncertainties of life and nature alike. I looked forward to each new adventure with hope and courage, knowing that the lessons we learned from the woods would shape our approach to whatever lay ahead. With an adventurous spirit ignited, I felt an unwavering belief that together we could tackle any challenge and uncover deeper truths in the wild, all while respecting the timeless narratives woven into the fabric of the natural world. As I embraced the journey, I held the promise to honor the lessons learned, ensuring that the stories of the forest and the shadows within would remain vivid in our hearts, reminding us to be brave in the face of the unknown.